Tonight on Brian Ross Investigates. With its state-of-the-art aircraft and impressive naval fleets, the U.S. will spend $686 billion this year on the military. But this week, the Pentagon admitted it can't stop a simple drone of the kind that attacked the Saudi Arabia Aramco oil complex.
When we look at areas where the NATO alliance and NATO capabilities are not at the level that we would like them to be, given the threats that we now face from unmanned aerial systems.
So what does that mean here at home for sports arenas, government centers, symbolic American landmarks? Are we safe from the drones? Plus, meet the two women lawyers who say the Me Too movement has gone too far, especially on college campuses.
We're first and foremost two females in a Me Too world representing mostly males accused of sex issues.
Lawyers on the other side say that's nonsense.
I don't think it's a mob mentality. I don't think there's anything that has gone too far.
And our shout out. With the approach of another dangerous wildfire season in California, the reporter who first documented how the big utility, PG&E, was at fault for some of the most devastating fires.
Power lines possible next to a tree at 1487.
From the Law&Crime Network studios in New York City's Herald Square, this is Brian Ross Investigates. And good evening and welcome. We begin tonight with a startling admission from the Pentagon this week that the U.S. does not really have the ability to stop what has emerged as a serious threat to American security, both at home and abroad. No country has a stronger or smarter military. The U.S. budget for defense now stands at $686 billion a year. But for all that money and smarts, nothing the U.S. has was able to stop an attack by 18 drones on the Saudi Arabian Aramco oil complex, supposedly protected by U.S. Patriot anti-aircraft missiles. Officials say each of the 18 drones struck their targets with surprising precision. And a top Pentagon official this week, John Rood, acknowledged the problem.
When we look at areas where the NATO alliance and NATO capabilities are not at the level that we would like them to be, given the threats that we now face from unmanned aerial systems, from cruise missiles, and from ballistic missiles, we do need to focus more on that.
But the implications go far beyond the Middle East. Last year in Venezuela, there was a failed assassination effort against the president. Authorities there say there were 2 drones packed with explosives, which failed to hit their intended target. But U.S. law enforcement has increasingly become concerned about the same thing happening here, about terrorists using drones to attack American targets, sports arenas, government centers, American symbolic landmarks.
Now, let me show you a few of the features here so you'll understand why I say this is truly a weapon of the future.
YouTube is now full of videos advertising new killing capabilities for the off-the-shelf drone.
Let's take them out.
And now a number of defense companies are competing to produce anti-drone shoot-down systems in a rush to patch up what is now realized as a gaping vulnerability. We're joined now by 2 people who have great knowledge and insight on this issue. Ian Williams, a security fellow and deputy director of the Missile Defense Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. And Karen Greenberg, director of the Center on National Security at Fordham Law School here in New York. Mr. Williams, let me start with you. What happened in Saudi Arabia that the U.S. Patriot anti-missile systems were unable to stop those drones?
Well, the chief challenge that they encountered was that these drones and cruise missiles fly so low that because of the curve of the Earth, the radars of the Patriot systems can't pick them up until they're almost on top of them. Another problem is that a Patriot's radar only has a 120-degree view. And we believe that the radars that were at Abqaiq, at the Saudi oil facility, were pointed southward. Now, this makes a lot of sense because Saudi Arabia has been engaged in an air and missile defense battle with Houthis in Yemen, and with missiles flying at them from the south, so it makes sense they would have it oriented that way. But when you have threats then now coming in from the north, they essentially came in from through their back door.
So they can't see behind them, essentially.
That's correct.
Wow. Karen Greenberg, what are the implications here in the U.S. for drones? Now, the ones in Saudi Arabia were more sophisticated than the off-the-shelf drones, but it is a concern here, isn't it, for U.S. law enforcement?
Well, I think so, and I think it's being taken very seriously. First of all, some of the defensive systems that they had in place in Saudi were provided by the U.S., Patriot 2. I think there's also a sense that we've entered a new form of warfare, which we've known is coming for a long time. It's almost like guerrilla warfare with unarmed drones. And so it's a question of, yes, the technical part of this is very important in terms of having 360 capability, being able to pick things up and censor them. But it's more of a sign of what it really means to be in this new era of warfare, and how good can we make not just our offensive systems, but our defensive systems. And I think a lot of thought is going to go into that now.
Karen, a question for you from our control room from executive producer Rhonda Schwartz. Rhonda?
What about here in the United States? We're obviously vulnerable to the same kind of attacks. What kind of defenses do we have? What if somebody threw those drones up over a football stadium or even over the White House?
Yeah, well, that's one of those very unsettling questions, and I don't think we have all the answers to what we do have. We do have some defensive systems. The question is, where are they? Where have they been employed? How are we thinking about just the kinds of things that Ian was raising about how low they fly and whether we can pick them up? But we definitely have been evolving a system for that. The problem now is how many countries have drones. It used to be a handful. It used to be something that the Americans were on the front lines of. Now there are over 90 countries, and we don't know the exact number, that have unmanned drones. And so the question really becomes, can we put the time and energy and resources into what we need to do to create the right defenses for this? And it's a matter of focus and resource.
So Ian, on that question, we're talking really about asymmetrical warfare here. What's being done to create a defense against these drones?
Right, well, here in the United States, the only area that I know of that has what I would call a robust sort of air defense system is the national capital region around Washington, D.C. There is there is a very heavily restricted airspace where if you enter any aircraft or anything down all the way down to a small drone, has to be registered. It has to be squawking certain codes to be authorized and have an authorized registered flight plan. If you don't have that, you will, if you're flying at jet speeds, you will be intercepted by an F-15 fighter jet. If you are flying a drone, or a Cessna or a smaller, slower aircraft flying lower, you'll be intercepted by one of a very small handful of Coast Guard helicopters. That's primary mission is to identify what is it, right? Is it a threat? Do we need to be worried about it? And then report that back to Northcom and NORAD in Colorado, who will then make a decision on what to do about it. But it kind of goes to one of the chief challenges of these threats of these drones and small aircraft is you pick them up on radar, they can be easily confused with a bird or another kind of object, and then you don't really know what it is until you actually see it with your own eyes.
No doubt a serious problem. Thank you both, Ian Williams and Karen Greenberg, for joining us tonight. You've opened a lot of eyes with your insights into this troubling issue. Next up, has the Me Too movement gone too far? The story of this college football player and the female lawyers who took his case when we return. The Me Too movement has hit every aspect of American society: government, finance, law, the media, and entertainment. Just this week, famed tenor Placido Domingo was forced to step away from a scheduled appearance at New York's Metropolitan Opera after allegations by a number of women of sexual harassment. He strongly denies the allegations, adding, "I'm concerned about a climate in which people are condemned without due process." And you're about to meet two lawyers, women, who agree, saying the Me Too movement has gone too far, sometimes they say creating a mob mentality, especially on college campuses. The football team, the Penguins, are the pride of Youngstown University.
Big Malik Richmond, the senior.
But there was outrage when word spread that a star of the football team, number 12, Malik Richmond, had been convicted of rape as a juvenile several years earlier.
Two high school football stars accused of sexual assault was exploding on the internet and dividing people in Steubenville, Ohio.
The trial received national attention. Richmond and another member of his high school football team in Steubenville, Ohio, were found guilty of raping a teenage girl during a drunken party, with the evidence including a damning videotape of other students boasting of what happened.
They raped her.
This is the funniest thing I've ever
They
seen.
raped her harder than that cop raped Marcellus Wallace in Pulp Fiction.
But after serving a year in prison, Richmond enrolled at Youngstown University, and the coach had no problem adding him to the football team.
I think he'd earned that over not only what he did with us, but what he'd endured over the last 4 or 5 years.
But thousands of students signed petitions to remove Richmond from the team, far greater numbers than those who supported him.
There also is another petition out saying a second chance for Malik. That is only at 119 signatures, and that other signature petition is at 7,000 signatures.
The school gave in, kicking Richmond off the team. So he fought back, hiring 2 lawyers from Cleveland to go to court and defend him from what they called a mob mentality.
I think that was a case that really highlighted the danger and the challenges attendant to mob mentality.
Christina Supler and Susan Stone have taken on what is for many a very unpopular set of clients.
We're first and foremost 2 females in a Me Too world representing mostly males accused of sex issues.
And they won in court in Youngstown, arguing the school was wrong to apply federal law called Title IX, which they said did not cover a case that occurred before a student was at the university.
He was a good student. There were absolutely no conduct violations. This young student is a wonderful human being who's really learned from his experience and did not deserve to be punished twice.
But it took going to court.
Yes.
So many of these cases.
Yes, it took going to court.
And now that's what they're doing around the country, fighting back against schools they say often don't know what they're doing as they try to deal with allegations of sexual abuse and assault.
They become mini courts, Brian, and I mean, we have called a lot of them kangaroo courts because, let's be fair, these are people who make up college body, the faculty, the administration, even the IT person can take part in the investigation and the adjudication of the process.
For example, they took the College of Charleston to court to defend a student who had been cleared by law enforcement but was still being investigated of sexual assault by the college authorities.
I think no school wants to be viewed as not taking sexual assault seriously. And so colleges and universities are again wrestling with this tension between fairness, but also taking a strong position to address what is a scourge.
The issue was highlighted during the Supreme Court confirmation hearings for Brett Kavanaugh, accused of sexual assault when he was an undergrad at Yale, allegations he strongly denied.
Well, if the same thing happened today at Yale, Yale probably would issue and commence an investigation into Justice Kavanaugh, and he would be facing not only just an investigation, but a suspension or potential expulsion from school or worse.
Schools issue no contact orders, an investigation unfolds. It's not unusual at all for students who have been accused before an investigation has even begun to be asked to move out of a dorm, to have their class schedule juggled and reorganized to avoid running into an accuser at a certain point on campus.
So Justice Kavanaugh's life would essentially be ruined even before an investigation would be commenced.
Yet the issue of sex assaults on campuses, including rape, is clearly a scourge that has not been addressed fully. One recent survey found that 1 in 5 female students in their 4th year of college had experienced attempted or completed sexual assault while in college. And while 65% of surveyed rape victims reported what happened to their friends or family, less than 10% reported it to police or school officials. But these 2 lawyers say the pendulum has now swung too far, with a lack of fairness and due process, and a number of unintended consequences.
We've wrestled with students calling us saying that they're so depressed, and again, that comes back to that approach of treating our students with compassion and care.
You've had clients who are suicidal?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Many.
Because?
Because they've lost their friends, they're kicked out of their fraternity, they're kicked out of their sports teams, nobody wants to talk to them, nobody wants to study with them, and they feel such shame after the allegation and such loneliness and such despair that they can't see beyond a better future.
A Title IX finding on a student's record is really the modern day scarlet letter.
To get a different perspective on this, I talked this week with one of the lawyers who's been a leader in helping women stand up to men who they say have abused them. Jeannie Harrison has her own firm in Los Angeles, and I asked her if she thought Me Too had gone too far, if there was, in fact, a mob mentality.
I don't see that at all. In fact, in my practice, I find that it is exceptionally difficult for victims to come forward and report. They are terrified about the consequences. And many of them, even when I meet with them and offer a tremendous amount of support, which is a core function of my office, is offering that support to victims and survivors, they even still decide that they're not going to come forward and report. There are many people who don't come forward and report because it's just too scary. So I don't think it's a mob mentality. I don't think there's anything that has gone too far. Victims have always been accused of making accusations or reporting incidents that the defendant or the accused say never happened. It's the same song, a little bit of a different tune.
Can both be true, though? Can there be cases where men are essentially what they say railroaded or falsely accused?
I mean, there are people who make false claims, but that's part of the system. The system is set up to handle that, to test the claims, and for victims to have to testify and put up evidence, which includes their testimony about what happened. And the system is configured so that there are going to be credibility determinations that are made by the trier of fact, whether that is in, school sex abuse cases or office and work sexual harassment cases. That's the purpose of the system.
So when these two lawyers who represent primarily men on campuses say they have sympathy for these men, they are ostracized often, some of them, they say, have actually been suicidal because of the allegations. Is there a problem with the process on college campuses?
No, I don't think there's a problem with the process on college campuses. I think that what does happen, there are some cases, obviously on an individualized basis, that seem not to be warranted, where certain, alleged conduct doesn't seem to have occurred. And there is no doubt that those who are accused of conduct in which they did not engage suffer as a result. But there are many people who actually have engaged in really inappropriate conduct, including sexual abuse, and take things way too far. And really, inflict tremendous emotional suffering on women and men whom they attack, and their lives are changed forever. And so I think it's regrettable when people choose to make false accusations, but I think that we cannot allow the backlash, which was almost instantaneous when the Me Too movement began. We cannot allow the backlash to drive away the victims who really do need to come forward and report these incidents.
Jeannie Harrison, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your insights.
Thank you so much.
Up next, our shout out. As the peak of the California wildfire season approaches, the reporter who first documented who was to blame for many of those dangerous wildfires. With the approach now of the peak wildfire season in California, a shout out for the reporter there who first documented how the state's big power company, PG&E, was often at fault. And he continues to follow the story since we first highlighted his work.
Everybody get out now. This is the Santa Rosa Police Department. It's time to go.
Just last year in 2018, there was the state's deadliest and most destructive fire, the Camp Fire.
Reporter Matthias Gaffney, known as T in the newsroom, was determined to find out the story of what happened. using a database that archives police and fire frequencies.
And I just started listening right around the time that they believed the fire started. And sure enough, I heard that a dispatcher get a call.
Looking across under the high tension power lines, there's a possible power line hazard.
And they basically reported that there were wires down underneath transmission lines.
Engine 2176, somewhere being you copy power line hazard.
And this is right at the moment that the campfire is believed to have started, and right in the area that the campfire was believed to have started.
Engine 2176 responding, copy power lines down.
And so that was a real big break in finding out what may be the cause for this fire.
The evidence pointing to the state's giant PG&E utility.
PG&E just now said that they are probably at fault with their equipment having a malfunction. And so that was, just a few days after the campfire that we were able to narrow that down and show that PG&E very well could be at fault.
And beyond the equipment malfunction, Gaffney determined that PG&E, if it followed its own guidelines, should have shut down the power in such high-risk fire conditions.
Most of those criteria were actually met prior to the campfire, yet for some reason they decided to keep the power on.
PG&E now has declared bankruptcy, saying it expects to face massive lawsuits.
I'm born and raised in the Bay Area here, and I have a family. I find it really impactful to kind of do reporting that immediately impacts my community and the people I've grown up with and I love and respect. So it's really pretty rewarding.
So a second shout out to Matthias Gaffney, who was a finalist for a Pulitzer Prize since we first highlighted his work. Now with the San Francisco Chronicle, he continues to track PG&E, reporting this week on what was a third round of power cutoffs by the power company in hopes of another devastating fire season being avoided. That's our program for tonight. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you back here next week.